Welcome into Vertical Pursuit, the podcast, webcast. Mike Barrett, Mike Tatlock, and this is where we kind of talk about anything and everything.
That's right.
And it's oftentimes unapologetically aimed at men, but as you explained a couple of episodes ago, the ladies are just fine with that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. It's like women want their husbands to have this experience. And so they're rooting for their husbands to have. So this is, and there's nothing out there like this. That's what we've talked about. There's a lot of podcasts, but what we're talking about is, yes, maybe more geared towards men, but I know women, it's a great opportunity for them to listen in, but really it's an opportunity to talk about the real stuff that guys aren't able to talk about in real life.
Well, and for those of you who don't know, I was an NBA broadcaster for a lot of years. Mike is not just a pastor, but also the team chaplain for the Portland Trailblazers. So we've both had experiences in our professional lives that have been with professional athletes.
That's right.
And when you read books, and I'm reading one right now, we both like military books, and I think a lot of guys do, and we tend to go to those because it's kind of this raw masculinity, and it's a band of brothers kind of thing. So we've dealt with a lot of that. And I know that you are dealing with a lot of that even now in your role as an NBA team chaplain. You were at the All-Star game not that long ago.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a special place to work.
Yeah. And when we talk about being really it's a fraternity, and it's the idea that it's a very small elite group of people that get to be a part of professional sports. And there's something about when you get into that arena, everybody wants something from you. And so what does that look like for you to develop the trust bond with others who understand your struggles, who understand what you're going through that maybe nobody else really gets? And they're the ones that you can trust. And so, you can be very isolated as a professional athlete. You can struggle with that. But at the same time, finding that camaraderie and that brotherhood is really important. There's a very interesting similarity between, you talk with guys who go to battle and they have that cohort is the word we're using it for, right? And then guys who are in professional sports or anybody who's played team sports understands that you've got that brotherhood with you. And there's an interesting similarity between the two.
The cohort word is great. And, you talk about battle and in all the sports, especially the major ones that we watch, there's probably nothing as similar or in the terminology around the sport as the NFL. And sometimes we just sit here and banter. Sometimes we have friends and buddies on and sports figures and life figures, and happy to have Sean Mannion with us today. Quarterback in the NFL, the all-time leading passer in Pac-12 history, the all-time leading passer for Oregon State. And I went to Oregon State, so I had a lot of memories watching you light it up. And even just a couple months ago, starting at Lambeau Field for the Minnesota Vikings against the NFL's MVP. I know you wished it would have been a little warmer than 1 degree that night in front of Lambeau. But Sean, thanks for the time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because I know that, my dad was a coach and a basketball coach. And so growing up, there are expectations, and most of it is awesome. You just grow up and you're going to be involved in that. Your dad, a coach, still is a coach. Yep. And I think your brother, we can get to that too. But anyway, that you were kind of no surprise where you were going to go, but you've gone to great heights with that. But tell us kind of growing up. I know you were from California and then came up here, and I guess we'll get to this too, but your family kind of came up here with you, and now they're up here as well.
Yeah, no, I grew up in the Bay Area. Like you said, my dad has been a football coach for, 30 years now at least. And, I think the biggest thing I think about with my dad being a coach is just exposure to the game and exposure to team sports and exposure to competition from an early age. I just think about it like any kid, you usually, you want to spend time with your dad. And for me, we had time spent together over football and over other sports too when I was younger. And eventually that love for football kind of grew the strongest, and that became my pursuit in life. But I think the biggest thing for me was just exposure to the game from an early age. Putting a football in my head, playing catch in the front yard, became something to do. And for other people, it might be at different things, but that's what it was for me.
Yeah. Dude, when you go back to that as a childhood, and did football, was that like the main thing for you? Did you have other sports too? Were you kind of like, hey, I want to try all these different ones? Were you just a natural athlete all around, or?
I was always very, very active. Yeah. So growing up, I played football, basketball, baseball. I played all three in high school,
Yep.
All growing up. So I played all the sports, I guess. I just loved being outside. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. There was a bunch of kids in our neighborhood. So there was pickup football, there was pickup basketball, pickup baseball, everything. So I loved them all. It's funny, actually, the other night I was watching the Blazer game with my wife, Megan, and our two daughters. And I was just thinking, man, like I miss playing basketball. It looks so much fun. Now my basketball game has gone way, way, way back on ice because it's just not worth it to sprain an ankle or worse. So I haven't played basketball in ages, but I have interest in all sports, and I played them all growing up. I think probably when I got to high school, I realized that football was the one that, kind of like Mike said, could take me to another height, if I pursued it. Yeah. But through all of high school, I played all three, and I loved them all.
But being 6'7", 6'8", you're the basketball coach, I'm sure, was saying, no, this is where you got to be, right?
Yes and no. We had a pretty good basketball team. I was not relied on for scoring very much. I'm trying to think of an NBA player comparison. I was like a skinnier version of Steven Adams, maybe. Okay. A lot of setting screens, a lot of rebounding. Not a lot of scoring, but I tried to just be a team guy and just play hard. For me, basketball started when football ended. So that was kind of the way I looked at it is, unfortunately it would conclude with us getting knocked out of the playoffs in football, but then the following Monday I'm at basketball practice, and I just loved being out there and I loved playing, but I wasn't much of a scorer. My game was not very well refined. I'll put it that way.
We're all told as kids when we're playing sports and we're taking it seriously and we watch sports, and especially in my house, and it's great to have dreams, but then you always have that one coach who says, they give you the percentages, on who's going to actually play varsity sports, and then all of a sudden it shrinks. Who's going to go to college and play sports, and then it really shrinks. Yeah. Who's going to make it to the professional level? Did you always have those dreams like all kids do? And then do you ever have to kind of stop and take stock when you have made it to the pinnacle?
I think like you said, like most every other kid, I think I always had my sights set on, man, I'd love to be a professional baseball player one day, basketball player the next day, football player the next day. I think as you get older, you can kind of feel, I remember, going back to my sophomore year of high school, I was able to start, I think maybe like 6 or 8 games, which isn't super common really to start as a quarterback on the varsity as a sophomore. And I remember the season ended, and I remember just feeling like, I'm going to have a chance to play a lot of football, but by the time I leave high school, and, the end of high school football can be really emotional. It was for me, and I still got to play in college. But I remember thinking, seeing all my older teammates, like I said, we got bounced from the playoffs, and just feeling like, I don't want this to end in 2 years. And I felt like with the amount of games I was, probably going to have an opportunity to play before college, I felt like that was a real possibility. And then you just dive in completely, and you try to just become all that you can be. Yeah. So to answer your question, I think a lot of it was kind of working it out myself and saying, like there aren't a lot of other kids who are going to have this opportunity to start whatever it was, 25, 30 games in high school. Yeah. How do I make the most of it? And I kind of set that goal for myself and just went all in.
That's awesome. When you think about a lot of kids growing up in sports homes, right? Like dad or mom's a coach, and it's kind of the lifeblood of the family. And obviously with your dad and stuff, what was some things he passed on to you? Like as you're growing up through high school and you're trying to do the best you can at football, but you enjoy all sports. Was there some things you look back at now and go, these were some things dad passed on to me that maybe I didn't even know it at the time, but looking back now, man, that formed me as an athlete, or even as a person, as a man.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the first thing was just exposure to the game. I think I was lucky in that, I had come to find out later, I had a skill set that really meshed well with, what my dad was doing in his career and his passion. And it was also lined up with my passion. Yeah. Now you could say, is that the chicken or the egg? Who knows, right? But I think I had a certain aptitude for being able to throw the ball well, and how you can get much better than your dad's a football coach, and he's always willing to go out and throw with you in the front yard. So I think that was kind of the beginning of it. But yeah, I really think, the beauty, I think, of what my dad did is, as a coach, you see kind of some of the movie depictions, and it's like we're talking about 3rd and 6 over dinner. Right. And it wasn't like that. It was, when we were at home, he was dad. When we were at practice, he was coach. But I think the biggest thing that he instilled in me was just like, don't set any sort of limit for yourself. And if you're going to do something, be all in. And if you have a good attitude about it and you're willing to work at it, like, the sky is the limit. And, I think from a young age, if you're a kid who's interested in sports and you say, I want to be a professional athlete, I think at some point, when you have a father or a father figure or a mother or anybody who's instilling in you that, like, hey, anything is possible if you really work at it. It kind of fans the flames of what you want to become.
Yeah. So we all know California is a factory, especially for quarterbacks. It just is. And so, I mean, you've got to stand out in that, because of the population. And so when you had success in high school, who came after you? I know you ended up at Oregon State, obviously, and we'll talk about why. Where were your offers, and how did you weigh those offers?
Yeah, again, I think it was a steady build. I think I went from, hey, this might be a possibility, to, hey, I'm starting to hear from schools. And then I know the goal that I set for myself, being from the East Bay, was I'd love to play in the Pac-12. So that was a goal in my own mind of, I grew up watching Kyle Bowler when he was at Cal. I grew up watching Aaron Rodgers when he was at Cal. All the success that Jeff Tedford had at Cal, because we were 20 minutes away from Cal Berkeley. So the goal I kind of set for myself was I'd love to play in the Pac-12. But then early on, Oregon State, was interested kind of from the beginning, and that really stood out to me. UCLA was another school that was interested, Washington State, and then San Diego State, who also had a really strong program with Brady Hoke at the time. So those were kind of the 4 main schools that I had, pretty open lines of communication with. And, I think it was just from there, one, hoping to get an offer from one of them, and then 2, trying to figure out what the best fit for me was, both football-wise and life-wise.
And unlike, really, we'll get to your NFL career, but it was funny, I was kind of thinking about it this morning, but whereas your NFL career, you've had to wait for opportunity, you didn't have that in college. So you went from getting early playing time, which is why you're the all-time Pac-12, career passing leader, because you played a lot. I mean, you think you threw for like 13,000 yards in college. So that was great, but you got thrown into the fire pretty quickly at Oregon State, right?
Yeah. I redshirted my first year, which I honestly think was the best thing for me. I was skin and bones. I was not very physically imposing at all. I mean, I was tall and lanky, but to have that redshirt year to really get your feet underneath you, develop yourself physically, develop yourself mentally, figure out how to be a college kid, figure out how to be a college athlete, was huge for me. And then I remember there was one point, I think it might have even been in spring practice, kind of following my redshirt season, where the other guys on the team, the other quarterbacks were, I think, injured or not able to practice. And somehow, like, suddenly I was taking every rep of the whole practice. And I didn't even realize it at the time, but I had a really good practice. And I think from there, I think I opened up my own eyes to, hey, I can do this. And, you'd have to ask Coach Riley and Coach Langsdorff, but I feel like that might have been a turning point where they might have felt like, hey, this kid's come a long way in his redshirt year. He might be ready to play. And so, like Mike said, it was my redshirt freshman year. I think I started 10 games, and it was a really tough year for us as a team, but there was a lot of growth for me personally as a player and for our team just in general. I think when you go through some of those rough patches, we come back the next year, and I think we go 9-4, we make it to a bowl game. And so there was a lot of growth for me personally, I think, for us as a team. But again, I'm so thankful, that throughout all of that, Coach Riley, Coach Langsdorf, everyone at Oregon State stuck by me. And, I just knew I was going to keep working and keep trying to be all I can be, and it wasn't perfect that redshirt freshman year, but I think it allowed me to continue to grow.
So Oregon State, so you end up, we talked about being the all-time Beavers leading passer, and I know they come back, they have you back and they honor you. I think I was at a game this year, I think when it was might have been the Stanford game where you were brought back. And that has to, no matter what's going on in the NFL, that's got to feel great. And then going back and, I mean, people do that, they can go back to their high school or whatever, but to go back knowing you still hold all those records and whatnot, and the impact you had on the program, it's got to feel great.
Yeah, honestly, you don't really think about those type of things in the moment. You're focused on we got to go to Salt Lake City, play Utah, and they got a good defense. Like those are the things that go through your head at the time. I think it's once you get further removed, and now I haven't. My last year was 2014. I think now you kind of go back and you really reminisce, and like you said, Mike, to go back to Oregon State and see honestly a lot of familiar faces, people that I played with. One of my teammates, Michael Doctor, is working in their recruiting department. So to get to go back and see someone like Mike Doc and talk about the teams we were on and talk about, the games that we played together. Honestly, I think when you reflect on some of the records or stuff like that, a lot of the reflection is on the people that you got to work with. Coach Riley, Coach Langsdorf, all of my offensive linemen that blocked for me, all my receivers that caught passes for me, all those guys on defense that did a great job. I think those are the things that stand out. You don't, in some cases you remember 3rd and 7, and if it's a big play or something like that, but you think more about the time spent, the effort that all of your teammates put in, and how now like you get to look back and share those memories. And I think, the records might be the things that get publicized, but those are the things that I know I personally remember.
Yeah.
So you a 3rd round pick's pretty good in the NFL. So you're a 3rd round pick, and you spent 4 years at the Rams?
Yes.
4 years at the Rams, and then now you just finished your 3rd year with the Vikings, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. What's it like having to keep the patience waiting for an opportunity in the NFL? And there's some guys, I've spent some time with Matt Moore, Derek Anderson, these are other Beaver quarterbacks who have made a nice career out of being a backup. And the one thing that Matt told me one time, we were playing in a golf event, and he said, hey, and he came on just a couple of years ago for Kansas City when Mahomes got hurt. And he goes, I've made a great career as a backup, and I will still be able to play with my kids when I'm done because I haven't had the crap beaten out of me because I'm a backup quarterback.
Yeah.
But what has it had to be like, and what has it taught you as a man, the patience of practicing every day and putting in the hours and the prep? Because you've got to be ready at a moment's notice in case somebody goes down. In this case, Kirk Cousins. But if somebody goes down and you got to go in. So, but what is it like? Is it get frustrating when you're wanting that chance to show what you have?
I would say it can get frustrating. I know for me, things have kind of changed. Let me rephrase. I think early on in my career, I was maybe a little bit more frustrated by it. But like you said with Matt, I think eventually, I remember I got to the realization that, like I can have a great career. I can be a part of great teams. I can work with great people. My teammates, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, my coaches, getting to work with, Mike Zimmer, Sean McVay, Gary Kuby, all these people. And I think you stand back and realize like, maybe if you had asked me in 2014, what's my NFL career going to look like? This might not have been how I was projecting it in my own mind. But this can still be an outstanding career. I can still get to work with amazing people. I can still get to be a part of great teams. I can still grow so much as a football player, as a person. And so I think it really changed. I remember, there was we were getting ready to play in the Super Bowl in 2018 with the Rams. And this was, I think, the year after Nick Foles had come in and done such a great job. And an old teammate of mine. Done such a great job for the Eagles and won the Super Bowl. So I don't really pay a ton of attention to the media, but at some point they did like a feature on backup quarterbacks in the lead up to the Super Bowl. And one of the people who was speaking on the piece was Steve Young, maybe the maybe the greatest, backup story ever, right? Maybe one of the all-time great quarterbacks.
Who had patience and got his time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember Steve Young said something. He said, eventually he came to the realization that the only way I'm going to get the job I want, in his case, he wanted to be, a franchise quarterback, the starting quarterback, was to be the best backup quarterback that I can be to Joe Montana. And that just really, I don't know, it just really stood out to me. It was like, you know what, like I said, in 2014, I might not have said, 4 years into my career and I have one start, I might not have picked that.
Right.
But the bottom line is, again, I can have a great career, and ultimately, for me to be the best quarterback that I can be, I'm going to be the absolute best backup quarterback that I can be for the LA Rams, for Jared Goff, for Sean McVay. And I don't know, to hear Steve Young say that, it was just a really, it really stood out to me as kind of an aha moment, and be like, you know what, like, it's not worth getting frustrated over. Look at all the great things that football has brought in my life, and it's just such a fortunate career for me to be in.
Yeah, that's when you go back to when you finally made it, right? Because it is a statistic anomaly. When you think about what are the odds, you got kids out there that are trying to make it. You got a lot of parents and dads trying to push their kids to make it. But when you go back and can you think of the time when you're like, this is real? Like, wow, I am here now. What did that feel like for you? What was going through your mind?
You know what? Honestly, the draft is a big moment.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting on your couch. The draft is really interesting because a lot of people don't know this. The telecast is actually probably, by the time you get to the third round, when I was picked, it's probably 7 picks behind where they're actually selecting, because the broadcast just can't go as quickly as the actual draft process can. So it can be a little bit stressful. You're sitting at your home, you're sitting on your couch, you're with all these people that love you. I'm sure I'm looking down at my phone like a maniac, just hoping to get a call from my agent, a call from an unknown number, anyone, right? You're just anxiously waiting. You don't know what's going to happen. And so that can be really stressful. The draft is a big moment. I would say the moment where I felt like, kind of like, oh, I belong, is once you start playing in the preseason, and you start to have some success in the preseason, you start to have some success in practice. To me, it was more the on-field, I can do this, as opposed to the draft moment. Because the draft, you still haven't met any of your teammates.
Right.
You haven't even been in a quarterback meeting yet. But I felt like once you start getting into the preseason, you start getting into training camp, you start to have some success at practice, that's when you feel like, you know what, I belong here. Yeah,
the emotion that goes into football, well, all sports, but football, when I was around at Oregon State and I was working with media relations when my baseball career fizzled, and I would be in the locker room after games because we would set up interviews and stuff for people. But there was one moment when I was in there right after a game, and the NBA has a 10 to 12 minute cool down where the players can go in and, if you need to punch a wall or whatever, you do it before the media comes in. But I was in there one time, and it was a game that they got trounced in. They weren't very good when I was there, and they were expected to lose. But I looked over, and there were 3 guys who had their helmets off, sobbing their eyes out, like heaving and sobbing. Not because they lost. I think just the immediate emotion of the game poured out of them. And I was like, wow. And I was envious of that passion and to see that going on. And then the brotherhood as they came together at the end of that. And maybe it was because of the physical nature of the battle they just were in. And again, I remember even thinking, as dumb as I was and young as I was at that point, it wasn't about that they just lost that game. It was the end of something they had built up to for a week with all of the blood, sweat, and tears. And then this pouring out of emotion. I don't think it's something that a lot of people get to experience. So what is that like? That emotion, not, the build up, first of all, as the week of practice goes, to the pregame talk, to even halftime and the postgame. What's the raw emotion like inside an NFL locker room?
Well, I think, people put their emotion on display in different ways. So, for instance, like at my position of quarterback, really I'm trying not to play the game with much emotion. I'm trying to play the game with precision and with sound decision making. And so for me, prior to the game, I'm probably maybe the least amped up guy. If I'm a defensive end or a linebacker or running back, those guys are really juiced up for the game.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm honestly trying to stay, I want to be flatlining in terms of
Because you're not trying to go kill somebody.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm trying to be as precise
Yeah.
and as again, as with sound decision making as possible. But the moments that you were talking about, Mike, I think those happen after the game.
Okay.
Because for me at least, you put so much work in during the off season, during training camp, during the week, you're just going from one meeting to the next, going to a walkthrough, going to a practice, and it's relentless focus on your opponent and on trying to get a win with your teammates. And so I think when the game ends and it can be such like an exhale, so to speak, and you get both sides of it, right? You get the moments where you're crushed because you know how much you put into this week of preparation, how much you put into your career, trying to become all you can be, and the outcome wasn't what you wanted. Or you get the elation of, we did it, guys. You think about all the hours and how it's all paid off for you, at least with this one result. And so I think for me, the moments where that emotion really can shine through is right after the game ends, like you said. Because there's honestly such a focus on what you're doing, and the week is so crammed in terms of a week-to-week schedule that you don't really have time to think about much else. I remember when I started this past year, I came off of the COVID list on a Friday. So Friday morning, I go in and see the doctor, and they have to check you and basically take you off the COVID list. So you're back to go. But that was the same morning that Kirk actually tested positive. Yeah. So as I'm walking in the building, he had tested positive. So literally I walk in the building and the QB coach calls me and he's like, "Hey, you're starting this week." And this is on a Friday. We're playing in Sunday Night Football.
At Lambeau.
Yeah, exactly.
Against the MVP.
Exactly. So I remember that, there's butterflies. All of a sudden your role has changed in an instant.
But that's what you prepare to do.
Exactly. And, I think I texted my wife. I was like, "Hey, just heads up. You might want to look into a flight to Green Bay. I'm starting this week." But then before you know it, hey, protection meeting starts. We got to go over their blitz package. And it's just such a quick turnaround and such a quick week. You don't have time to really process those emotions, like I said, until after the game. You're more focused minute to minute.
Wow. It's so good. On the heels of that, in the NBA, and it's true of every sport, one of the things we talk about as a chaplain is you're either a friend or you're a fan. And I think that distinction shows that there's players and then there's the person. And, one of the sayings in the NBA is more than an athlete, right? And it's true because you are a dad, a husband, a son, a person,
right?
Not just this machine that's out there on the field trying to execute precision.
Right.
So when you think of just you as a person, what are some of like the stresses, the hardships, the challenges that you face being an NFL quarterback?
I think the one thing that I have always tried to do, really since I got married, and especially since I've gotten kids, is not bring my work home with me. If you have a tough practice in training camp, don't go home and be in a pissed off mood, around your kids, around your wife. I think that can be hard. That can be hard because, like I said, you put so much into it. It's your career. It's no longer a hobby. This is your profession. This is what you've dedicated your life to. But I think the one thing that I always try to focus on is I'm not going to let how I did at practice, how I did in that preseason game, how I did in that regular season game affect the type of father I'm going to be at home, the type of husband I'm going to be at home. So that's been a point of focus for me is just to really try not to take my work home with me. But I also think it can work the other way too. And I know since becoming a father, if I have a bad practice, if I have a bad game, I'm going to go home and my two daughters, Sawyer and Lennon, they're not going to care. They're not going to care if I threw a pick on third down. They're not going to care if I took a bad sack. Like, they don't care about that. They just care about dad. Yeah. And I think that also gives you great perspective and lets you realize, hey, these might be high pressure moments, but the things that really, really matter to me are at home, and that's not going to change.
One thing that's talked about with a lot of sports, and we mentioned this before, but you see it, is the brotherhood and the fellowship that happens between guys who are teammates either on that team or teammates later. And I texted you right after the Super Bowl because I had a friend who was down there and happened to end up at a breakfast with Todd Gurley, who was a great Rams running back and running back at Georgia. And without him bringing up that there was a 6-degree separation to you through me, Todd was talking about old teammates and brought you up and just talked about how great you were and was giving memories of phone calls and texts after tough games, after injuries. Those things you're going to have forever. Mm-hmm. So is that just natural, or are you intentional about being a brother to fellow players?
I think I try to be a good teammate. I think, you just try to be the best teammate you can be. Try to be yourself. I wouldn't say I'm like intentional of like, I don't have a reminder on my phone. Hey, make sure you text this guy. Make sure it's not like that. I think you just try to be who you are and try to take an interest in your teammates and take an interest in their lives and get to know them on a genuine level, not on a superficial level. And so, to hear that Todd was saying that about me, it means so much to me because Todd was a great friend of mine in our time in LA together, and obviously an amazing player, but a great teammate. And, to hear that means a lot to me. But honestly, I think I just tried to, try to get to know people on a genuine level and try to take an interest in what's going on in their lives outside of football. And I think the rest of it will kind of come naturally is kind of my view on it. That's been my approach.
Yeah, that's good. We talk about culture a lot too, locker room culture. And when you look at all the teams you've played with, every team has a culture. Our homes have culture. When you think about it, guys who are listening work at, wherever they go to work. There's a culture there. Yeah. When you think of the cultures that you've been a part of at every level, high school, college, pro, what would be like one or two aspects of what makes a good culture?
Well, I think that's a great question. Actually, this past season, before I ended up back in Minnesota, I was in Seattle for a little bit and got to work with Coach Carroll and the Seahawks and that organization. And, I just remember there was such a relentless enthusiasm. I think when I've described it to other people, it's just relentless enthusiasm. And I remember, we play the Las Vegas Raiders in the first preseason game. I think we only scored one touchdown. Geno Smith, who was the backup in Seattle, got knocked out of the game with concussion. So, offensively, it wasn't our best day. And so you kind of go in the locker room, you're like, man, like I don't know that we as a team really put our best foot forward. And this was my first preseason game with Coach Carroll. And I just remember him being so positive after a game, like I said, that, probably wasn't our best. But he came into the locker room and addresses the team, and in the most genuine, authentic way possible says, "Man, I can't wait to show you the way these guys were running around on special teams, like the effort our guys were given, and it wasn't artificial. You could tell that he really believed it. So, I think that's obviously the way Coach Carroll has built that culture in Seattle. Yeah. But I think the biggest thing is that the leader absolutely is convicted in whatever culture I'm going to build. And so, again, I only had a short stint in Seattle this offseason, but you could tell that Coach Carroll was completely convicted and I'm going to be enthusiastic every moment I'm in this building. And it rubs off on everybody. Yeah. And I think that's just an illustration of how powerful a culture can be. There's lots of different ones. There's no right or wrong, right? Yeah. But I think the fact that Coach Carroll was so convicted about it and believed it down to his core really made it all the more powerful.
Speaking of Seattle, Russell Wilson, I've gotten to be around a little bit just from other projects, and he's going to be a future guest on this show. So I bring up Russell, Brandon Cooks, certainly, Cooper Kupp, certainly, the NFL MVP, and this, no secret, Mike's a team chaplain. We talk about a lot of deep things on here. These guys are guys who wear their faith on their sleeve, and they promote it, and they are on social media about it. I know Brandon is very intentional. Russell is too, and Cooper has gotten that way too. I mean, for Cooper to sit at a Super Bowl post-game press conference and say that the Lord gave him a vision that he would be the MVP and have no fear about being mocked or laughed at after doing that, that's just courage. And I loved that. How much of that do you see? I went through, I think it was one day the Rams had tweeted out their official account. Oh, they were retweeting their own players' reactions. It was amazing to me how many of them talked about the Lord, talked about Jesus giving me strength. I know that's a big thing. Well, it's a big thing in the NBA. I know it's a big thing in the NFL too. How much of that is there? I know you're not one of those guys that does that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Some guys choose to do it, other guys don't. But I know you love Brandon,
Absolutely.
and Cooper, who's fantastic too. I do admire their courage, and I do admire their like, hey, this is just authentically me.
Yeah.
And there is some of that in the NFL, and I think maybe I saw more of that from the Rams after the Super Bowl, maybe because I was looking for it.
Yeah.
But what do you make of that?
Well, I think the thing is, and kind of getting back to, your question about culture, is I think everyone wants to have a culture where every person in that building feels like they can be true to themselves and express themselves in the way that they feel most comfortable. And, kind of like Mike said, I tend to be a little bit more private when it comes to my faith, and other people are more outgoing about it. And that's great. And I think the great cultures in sports, which you just listed numerous examples, make everyone feel empowered to just be who they are and be comfortable in expressing themselves however they choose. And I think, the example that Mike just gave is a perfect one of, a culture where everyone feels like they can be themselves, whether you're a little bit more open about your faith or whatever else, really, any of your other interests, or if you tend to be a little bit more on the private side, kind of like where I lean. But I think the thing is you want every person to feel comfortable to be themselves.
Yeah. No, I think that's great because at the end of the day, one of the things we talk about with pro athletes is you have this incredible platform of influence. And that's really what I think, what you're saying is it's idea of everybody has a part of who they are, and it's what shapes them. It's, some are more open about it, some more private about it, but it's part of who they are. And what does it look like for you with kind of feeling, is that a stressful thing? Like, man, I'm not just distressed of being a pro athlete, but do you feel this sense of, I got this platform I have to steward to try to influence and help be a role model, be a positive influence? Do you ever think through that? And what does that look like for you?
I haven't really thought through it in that way. I think kind of the way that I look at it is just always trying to be self-reflective and saying, how can I be the best husband I can be? How can I be the best father I can be? How can I be the best teammate I can be? Working with, some of my brother's teammates and stuff this past year, how can I be the best high school football coach I can be? And I think if I am self-reflective and trying to grow in all of those areas, I think a lot of the impact that you're talking about will kind of happen by osmosis. And so I think that's kind of the indirect effect of being as self-reflective in my own personal growth in many different areas. And I think by doing that, in my opinion, you achieve the result that you're talking about kind of unintentionally in some ways.
I appreciate that because I think there's a lot of guys that they don't do enough self-reflective, or maybe the only self-reflection they do is just about them.
Right.
Everything's about them. Everything's about them getting the contract, getting the attention, getting whatever endorsements and so forth. But I love how you were saying that being self-reflective allows us to go, wait, this is bigger than just me. Everything I do has an impact on somebody that's watching and looking up to me, and just thinking globally, not just, for you as a person. And you mentioned being a dad too, and the two girls. What's it like being a dad for you? Like, what's that What's I mean, there's probably a lot of dads that are listening on here, and what's that been like for you?
Oh, it's the greatest. It's the greatest. I mean, being able to play in the NFL is great, but being a dad is way better. It's just it's so rewarding. It's a life-changing moment when you become a father. And it's just so great. I kind of circle back to what I was saying before. Like, I remember, our first daughter, Sawyer, was born in the middle of training camp. Of course, great timing. But I remember it was just like, training camp can be a little bit stressful. You're playing in the preseason, you're getting ready for the regular season, kind of things are ratcheting up from a football perspective. But again, like, you're just, I don't know, you go home and you're hit with this realization of like, the responsibility that I have here is so much bigger and so much more meaningful on a personal level. And Sawyer doesn't care, again, what our third down conversion percentage was. Like, she doesn't care about that.
She was telling me.
Yeah, right. Maybe someday. Maybe someday she'll be like, Dad, what were you thinking there in the red zone? I don't know, maybe. But you come to realize that, like, I don't know. It's such a powerful way to put things in perspective. And again, like, you think about all of your toughest moments that you might have in your playing career. My daughters, they're not going to care about that. They just want me to be a great dad, and so that's what I set out to try to do.
And what I just hear you say on that, and I think just to park on that for a second, is your priorities. And I think that's for us when we talk about men, and a lot of guys listen to this, and a lot of guys have not, at your age and at where you're at as early in your career, there's a lot of guys that are pro athletes that get to the end of their career, retire, they look back and they've got all these regrets that they made it about pursuing all the other things in life, and then they really abandoned the most important thing. And you don't have to be a pro athlete to do that. You can be working down the street at a bank. You could be working at a school, a college, whatever. We can all miss those priorities, spend our whole life chasing after a measure of success and miss the blessing that was right in front of us.
Yeah, I think there's many different careers, like you said, and some of them require more time, more travel, different schedules, different demands at home, all that kind of stuff. But again, to me, I think the thing is, again, getting back to trying to be self-reflective is, am I, striving to be the best in my career, and am I also dedicating myself to be the best I can as a husband, as a father? And I think you want to feel like you're putting in the effort in all areas of your life. And again, like, different careers, different occupations, all that kind of stuff require different things of you. Might require you to be on the road. I know travel for you, I'm sure, in the NBA is a lot tougher than the NFL. So there's just different things that get asked, but I think you just have to, again, try to be self-reflective and say, am I doing all that I can do, to be great in all the areas of my life, not just my career.
Well, we appreciate the time. I'm not going to have you speculate because you're a free agent, so we won't even go there. But I know it's got to be kind of in closing, I know it's a nervous time. Not a nervous time, but it's an awkward time probably when you're a free agent and you're not sure what's next. How are you approaching that?
Yeah, the past several years I've been on kind of 1-year contracts, so it's a little bit of year to year. I think playing in the NFL can be it is an outstanding career. I think the one thing that there is a lot of in my profession is uncertainty, and things can change quickly. You don't know where you'll be 1 year to the next. You don't know where you'll be 1 week to the next. Things can be in flux at all times. So this is a time of the year with free agency coming up where you're never quite sure how things will project for next season. But I love my time in Minnesota. I love my teammates there, and we have a new coaching staff, everything, and it's an exciting time for that organization. I'd love to be back there. I'd love to just keep trying to survive in the NFL and keep playing as long as I can. So we'll see what happens. Usually there's a lot of movement kind of in the next month or so, and hopefully something will pan out, and I'm confident that it will. So.
Well, you're carrying yourself in the right way, and that's to be admired. And I know that a lot of Oregon State fans are proud of what you've done and gone on and carried the flag into the NFL.
Well, I appreciate that.
We appreciate the time, Sean.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And that's Vertical Pursuit. We appreciate all of you for watching, for listening, and we will see you next time. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast, comment, or message us, and check out our website at verticalpursuit.org. Download the VP app and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.